The homeless shelter in downtown Chicago smelled of disinfectant and desperation. Dr. Sarah Mitchell pulled her worn coat tighter around her swollen belly as she waited in line for dinner, her eyes fixed on the cracked linoleum floor. 6 months ago, she had been delivering lectures to packed auditoriums at Northwestern University. Her expertise in European art history, specifically pieces looted during World War II, making her one of the most respected voices in her field. Now, at 34 and 7 months pregnant, she was just another face in the crowd of society's forgotten. The transformation had been swift and merciless. It started with a single accusation from a student, Bradley Hawthorne, whose mediocre grades had earned him sharp criticism from Sarah during her advanced art history seminar. The allegation was as simple as it was devastating: inappropriate conduct between professor and student. No evidence, no witnesses, just the word of a young man whose wealthy family had connections throughout the university's board of trustees. Sarah remembered the moment she first heard about the accusation. She had been in her office, cataloging research for her upcoming book on Nazi-looted artwork, when Dean Roberts knocked on her door. His face was grave, his usual friendly demeanor replaced by cold professionalism. "Sarah, we need to talk," he had said, closing the door behind him, with a finality that made her stomach drop. The investigation was a sham. The committee was comprised of colleagues she had considered friends, but their faces remained impassive, as Bradley's testimony painted her as a predator who had allegedly promised better grades in exchange for personal favors. Her protests of innocence fell on deaf ears. The university's reputation was at stake, they said. Damage control was necessary. Within a week, she was suspended pending investigation. Within a month, she was terminated. The local media picked up the story, and suddenly her name was synonymous with academic misconduct. Her photo appeared in newspapers with headlines that made her skin crawl. "Professor accused of student exploitation and academic integrity, under fire at Northwestern." Her family's reaction was perhaps the most devastating blow of all. Her parents, Robert and Eleanor Mitchell, had built their reputation in Boston's conservative social circles over decades. They were prominent members of the Episcopal Church, active in charity work, and deeply concerned with appearances. When the scandal broke, they didn't ask for her side of the story. They simply issued a statement through their lawyer, distancing themselves from their daughter's alleged actions and requesting privacy during this difficult time. Her younger brother, Michael, a successful investment banker in New York, stopped returning her calls. Her sister, Jennifer, a pediatrician in Philadelphia, sent a single text message: "I can't be associated with this right now. I have my own practice to protect." The isolation was complete. Friends from the academic world avoided her calls. Her publisher cancelled her book contract. Her savings dwindled as legal fees mounted, and without income, she couldn't afford her apartment near the university. The pregnancy complicated everything, a reminder of a relationship that had ended badly months before the scandal erupted. The father was Dr. Marcus Thompson, a visiting professor from Yale who had spent a semester at Northwestern. Their relationship had been passionate but tumultuous, filled with arguments about their different approaches to art history and their incompatible views on commitment. When he returned to New Haven, they had ended things on bitter terms. Sarah had discovered she was pregnant weeks after he left, and her attempts to contact him had been met with silence. Now, standing in the shelter's dining hall with a plastic tray in her hands, Sarah felt the weight of her circumstances pressing down on her. The other residents gave her curious glances. Her educated speech and refined manners marked her as different from the usual population. She had been living here for 3 weeks, sleeping on a narrow cot in a room shared with 5 other women, each carrying their own stories of loss and disappointment. "You're new," said a voice beside her. Sarah turned to see a woman in her 50s, with graying hair pulled back in a neat bun, and intelligent eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. "I'm Betty. Been here about 2 months." "Sarah," she replied, grateful for the friendly overture. "You don't look like you belong here," Betty observed, not unkindly. "None of us do really, but you especially. What's your story?" Sarah hesitated. She had grown tired of explaining, tired of seeing the judgment in people's eyes when they learned about the accusations, but something about Betty's straightforward manner invited honesty. "I was a professor," Sarah said quietly. "Art history until I wasn't." Betty nodded, knowingly. "Ah, one of those stories. The kind where the truth doesn't matter as much as the appearance of impropriety." Something like that. They found seats at a corner table, away from the main flow of traffic. The dinner was simple. Meatloaf, mashed potatoes and green beans, but Sarah ate gratefully. The baby had been active all day and she needed the nutrition. "You know," Betty said, stirring her food thoughtfully, "I used to be a social worker, spent 30 years helping people navigate the system, lost my job when the state cut funding. For my department, couldn't find another position at my age, lost my apartment, and here I am. Life has a way of humbling us all." Sarah felt a kinship with this woman, who had also fallen from a position of respect and purpose. "Do you ever think about fighting back? Trying to clear your name?" Betty smiled sadly. "Every day. But sometimes the system is bigger than we are. Sometimes survival is the only victory we can achieve." As they finished their meal, Sarah's mind wandered to the small suitcase under her cot. Inside were the few possessions she had managed to salvage from her former life. Some clothes, a few books, and a leather portfolio containing her research notes. She had been working on a particular piece about a network of art dealers who had operated during and after World War II, moving stolen artwork through a complex web of legitimate galleries and private collectors. The research had been meticulous, connecting dots across decades and continents. What she hadn't shared with anyone was that her work had begun to attract attention from unexpected quarters. Just before the scandal broke, she had received inquiries from a documentary filmmaker and a journalist from the Washington Post. They were interested in her findings about how Nazi-looted art continued to surface in American museums and private collections. The timing of the accusations against her seemed almost too convenient, but Sarah had been too overwhelmed by the immediate crisis to consider the implications. Now, with time to think and nothing but time on her hands, she began to wonder if there was more to her downfall than a vindictive student's false accusation. The art world was a small community, and her research had been poking at some very powerful interests. Galleries, auction houses, and private collectors had millions of dollars at stake if her work led to repatriation demands. The baby kicked, bringing her back to the present moment. Whatever conspiracies might exist, her immediate concern was survival. She needed to find a way to support herself and her unborn child, but her reputation was in ruins. No university would hire her, no museum would consider her for a position, and her expertise in art history seemed useless in the job market. As she prepared for bed in the crowded room, Sarah made a decision. She would continue her research, not for publication or academic glory, but for the truth. If powerful people had orchestrated her destruction, she would find a way to expose them. If her expertise was unwanted in the legitimate art world, perhaps she could find another way to use it. The other women in the room were settling in for the night, each lost in their own thoughts and circumstances. Sarah placed her hand on her belly, feeling the gentle movements of her child. "I promise you," she whispered, "this isn't how our story ends." Outside, Chicago's winter wind rattled the windows of the shelter, but inside, Dr. Sarah Mitchell began to plan her resurrection. She didn't know yet that her research had already caught the attention of someone who would change everything, or that her expertise would soon be exactly what a mysterious benefactor needed. All she knew was that she refused to let her story end in defeat. The man who approached Sarah in the shelter's common room 3 days later looked completely out of place. While everyone else wore donated clothes and carried the weight of hardship, in their posture, he moved with the confidence of someone accustomed to command. His olive complexion and dark hair suggested Middle Eastern heritage, and his tailored coat, though understated, clearly cost more than most residents saw in months. Dr. Sarah Mitchell. His voice carried a slight accent, refined and educated. "My name is Omar al-Rashid. I wonder if we might speak privately." Sarah looked up from the donated book she had been reading, her heart racing. No one had called her doctor in months, and the formal address felt both foreign and comforting. Around them, other residents glanced curiously at the well-dressed stranger, but none approached. "I think you have me confused with someone else," Sarah said carefully. Her instincts told her to be cautious. Nothing good ever came from strangers. "Seeking out homeless pregnant women." Omar smiled, an expression that seemed genuine despite her wariness. "I don't believe so. You published a paper last year about the Monuments Men and Post-War Art Recovery Efforts. Your research methodology for tracking provenance was quite impressive." Sarah's breath caught. Her academic work felt like a lifetime ago, and hearing it referenced by this mysterious man sent a chill through her. "Who are you and what do you want?" "Perhaps we could discuss this somewhere more private. I have a proposal that might interest you, one that would make use of your considerable expertise." Against her better judgment, Sarah found herself following Omar to a small coffee shop 2 blocks from the shelter. He ordered for both of them, coffee for himself, hot chocolate for her, and a selection of pastries that made her mouth water. It had been weeks since she had eaten anything that wasn't from the shelter's kitchen. "I'll be direct," Omar said once they were seated. "I represent a private collector who has recently acquired a significant collection of European art. The pieces require proper cataloging and authentication, particularly those with potentially complicated provenance. Your reputation in this field is exemplary." "My reputation is ruined," Sarah said flatly. "Surely you know that." "I know what the newspapers say. I also know that accusations are not convictions, and that your academic work speaks for itself. My employer is less concerned with gossip than with competence." Sarah studied his face, trying to read his motivations. "Why approach me? There are plenty of art historians who could do this work without the baggage I carry. Perhaps, but few with your specific expertise in Nazi-looted artwork and provenance research, and none who find themselves in a position where they might be motivated to work outside traditional academic circles." The implication hung between them like a challenge. Sarah sipped her hot chocolate, buying time to think. The warmth spread through her chest, a luxury she hadn't enjoyed in months. "What exactly are you proposing?" "Room and board at a private estate in Colorado, complete access to the collection for cataloging purposes, and compensation of $50,000 for 6 months' work." Omar slid a business card across the table. "The location is remote, but comfortable. You would have complete privacy to work, and all medical expenses would be covered." Sarah nearly choked on her drink. $50,000 was more money than she had seen since losing her job. With a baby coming, it could mean the difference between stability and continued destitution. But something about the offer felt too good to be true. "What's the catch?" she asked. "No catch. The work is legitimate, though it requires discretion. My employer values privacy and would expect confidentiality regarding the collection and its contents." "And if I refuse?" Omar shrugged. "Then you refuse. I return to my employer empty-handed, and you continue your current circumstances." "No. Harm, no pressure." Sarah's mind raced. Every instinct told her to be cautious, but her current situation was desperate. The baby was due in less than 2 months, and she had no plan for what would happen after the birth. The shelter had a 30-day limit on stays, and she was already approaching that deadline. "I need to think about it," she said. "Of course. Here's my card. The offer stands for 48 hours. After Omar left, Sarah walked slowly back to the shelter, her mind churning. She found Betty in the common room working on a crossword puzzle. "You look like you've seen a ghost," Betty observed. Sarah sat down beside her and recounted the conversation, careful to keep her voice low. Betty listened without interruption, her expression growing more serious as the story progressed. $50,000. Betty whistled softly. "That's life-changing money for someone in your position." "It seems too good to be true." "Maybe. Or maybe someone recognizes your value when the rest of the world has written you off." Betty set down her pencil and looked directly at Sarah. "What does your gut tell you?" "That I'm desperate enough to consider anything." "That's not your gut talking, that's your fear. What does your professional instinct say about this man and his offer?" Sarah considered the question carefully. "He knew my work intimately, referenced specific papers, understood my methodology. He didn't seem like a criminal or a con artist, but there's something he's not telling me. There always is, honey. The question is whether what he's hiding is dangerous to you and that baby. That evening, Sarah lay on her narrow cot, staring at the ceiling and listening to the sounds of the shelter settling in for the night. One woman was crying softly, a sound that had become as familiar as breathing in this place. Another was muttering prayers in Spanish. The air was thick with the weight of broken dreams and uncertain futures. She thought about her unborn child and the world she was bringing him or her into. Her savings account had $17. Her career was destroyed. Her family had abandoned her. The father of her child refused to acknowledge her existence. What kind of life could she provide? The next morning, Sarah called the number on Omar's card. "I accept your offer," she said when he answered. "Excellent. Can you be ready to travel this afternoon?" The speed caught her off guard. "This afternoon? The sooner we begin, the better. I'll arrange transportation and take care of your current accommodations." Within hours, Sarah found herself in the back of a luxury sedan heading west out of Chicago. Omar sat beside her, making polite conversation about her academic background and the work ahead. He was knowledgeable about art history, asking thoughtful questions about her research methods and showing genuine interest in her theories about post-war art trafficking. As the Illinois countryside gave way to the plains of Iowa and then Colorado, Sarah felt both excitement and apprehension. The car was warm, the seats comfortable, and for the first time in months she wasn't worried about where she would sleep or what she would eat, but questions nagged at her. Why the urgency? What was so special about this collection that it required immediate attention? And why choose someone whose reputation was in ruins rather than an established expert? "Tell me about your employer," she said as they crossed into Colorado. Omar was quiet for a moment, looking out at the snow-covered mountains rising in the distance. "He's a private man who has spent his life collecting beautiful things. Art, books, artifacts. He sees himself as a curator of history. The collection we need you to evaluate came to him recently through an estate acquisition." "What kind of estate?" "European, old family, significant holdings. The previous owner was discreet about provenance documentation." Sarah felt a familiar tingle of excitement. This was the kind of puzzle she lived for. Art without clear ownership history, pieces that might have complex stories spanning decades or centuries. Despite her circumstances, she was still an art historian at heart, and the prospect of working with mysterious pieces was intoxicating. As evening approached, they turned off the main highway onto a winding mountain road. Pine trees lined both sides, and Sarah could see glimpses of a lake through the branches. The air grew thinner as they climbed, and she felt her ears pop from the altitude change. Finally, they reached a massive wrought iron gate flanked by stone, some hillers. Omar spoke into an intercom, and the gate swung open silently. The drive curved through manicured grounds before revealing a sprawling lodge-style mansion that seemed to grow out of the mountainside itself. Warm light glowed from dozens of windows, and smoke rose from several chimneys. "Welcome to Mountain Haven," Omar said as the car came to a stop. "You're home for the next 6 months." As Sarah stepped out of the car, she breathed deeply of the crisp mountain air. For the first time since her world had collapsed, she felt something that might have been hope. Whatever secrets this place held, whatever complications lay ahead, she was no longer powerless. She had work to do, a mystery to solve, and the means to build a future for her child. She had no way of knowing that the man who owned this magnificent estate was watching her from an upstairs window, or that her arrival was the culmination of months of careful planning that had nothing to do with coincidence. The man Sarah met the next morning was nothing like she had expected. Khalil al-Rashid was younger than she had imagined, perhaps 45, with silver threading through his dark hair and intelligent brown eyes that seemed to take in everything at once. He moved with quiet confidence through the mansion's halls, pointing out details of the architecture and the permanent collection with the ease of someone deeply comfortable in his surroundings. "I hope you slept well," he said, as he led her toward what would become her workspace. The altitude affects some people initially, but most adjust within a few days. The room is beautiful, Sarah replied, and it was true. She had been given a suite on the second floor with a sitting area, bedroom and bathroom that rivaled any luxury hotel. The view from her window showcased the lake and surrounding peaks, a vista that made her previous accommodations seem like a distant nightmare. I'm glad you're comfortable. Now, let me show you why you're here. They descended to the mansion's lower level, where Khalil produced a key and opened a heavy wooden door. Sarah's breath caught as they entered what could only be described as a private museum. The climate-controlled room stretched the length of the house, with paintings lining the walls and glass cases containing manuscripts, sculptures, and artifacts from various periods and cultures. "This is incredible," Sarah whispered, her professional instincts immediately engaged. Even at first glance, she could see pieces that would be at home in major museums worldwide. "How long have you been collecting?" "My family has been acquiring art for generations," Khalil replied. "But this particular collection is more recent. As Omar mentioned, it came to us through an estate acquisition. The previous owner kept minimal documentation, and we need to establish proper provenance for insurance and legal purposes." Sarah moved closer to examine a painting that made her heart race, a small oil on canvas that appeared to be from the Italian Renaissance. The style was unmistakable, but something about it nagged at her professional memory. She had seen this piece before, or at least a photograph of it, in her research. "May I?" she asked, gesturing toward the painting. "Of course, that's why you're here." Sarah studied the piece carefully, noting the brushwork, the composition, the way light played across the subject's face. Her mental catalogue of lost and stolen artwork was encyclopedic, and she was certain this piece had appeared in her research files. "This is from the Weinstein collection," she said quietly. Khalil's expression didn't change. The Weinstein collection. Jewish family from Vienna. Their entire collection was seized by the Nazis in 1938. Most of the pieces were never recovered. Sarah turned to face him. "This should be in a museum or returned to the family's heirs." "That's precisely why we need your expertise," Khalil said smoothly, "to determine the proper course of action for pieces with complicated histories." Over the following weeks, Sarah threw herself into the work with an intensity she hadn't felt since her academic days. The collection was vast and varied, containing pieces from across Europe and spanning several centuries. But as she worked, a disturbing pattern emerged. Nearly 30% of the collection consisted of pieces that had been looted, stolen, or otherwise improperly acquired during World War II. Her pregnancy was progressing, making the work more physically challenging, but her mind was sharper than ever. She created detailed files for each piece, documenting her findings and recommendations. Some items could be legitimately held, but many required immediate attention from authorities specializing in art repatriation. What puzzled her was Khalil's reaction to her discoveries. Rather than seeming concerned about potential legal complications, he appeared fascinated by the stories behind each piece. He would spend hours discussing the historical context of various works, asking detailed questions about the families who had owned them and the circumstances of their loss. "You seem to know a great deal about these families," Sarah observed. One afternoon, as they reviewed a particularly troubling case involving a collection of medieval manuscripts. "I find history fascinating," Khalil replied. "The intersection of art, politics, and human tragedy creates such complex narratives." Sarah studied his face, trying to read his motivations. There was something about his interest that felt deeper than mere curiosity. "Have you considered that holding some of these pieces might be illegal?" "That's what I'm paying you to determine. Your recommendations will guide our actions." As December turned to January, Sarah's relationship with Khalil deepened beyond their professional collaboration. He was well-read, thoughtful, and genuinely interested in her perspectives on art and history. Unlike most collectors she had worked with, he seemed more interested in the stories behind the pieces than their monetary value. During long winter evenings, they would sit by the fireplace in his study, discussing art history, politics, and philosophy. Sarah found herself sharing details about her academic career, her research, and even her personal struggles. Khalil was an excellent listener, asking thoughtful questions and offering insights that demonstrated both intelligence and empathy. "You mentioned that your mother was also interested in art," he said one evening as snow fell outside the windows. "She was a painter," Sarah replied. "Not professionally, but she had talent. She died when I was 16, a car accident." "I'm sorry. That must have been difficult." It was. She had been working on something before she died, some kind of research project. I never fully understood what it was about, but I found some of her papers when I was cleaning out her studio. Notes about art dealers, galleries, strange connections between pieces from different collections. Khalil leaned forward slightly. "What kind of connections?" "I'm not sure. The notes were cryptic, almost coded. She had names, dates, locations, but I was too young and too grief-stricken to make sense of it all. I kept her papers, though. They're in storage back in Chicago." Something flickered across Khalil's expression, too quick to interpret. "Your mother sounds like she was a remarkable woman." "She was. I sometimes wonder if my interest in provenance research came from her. She always said that every piece of art had a story to tell, and that those stories mattered as much as the aesthetic value." As winter deepened, Sarah's feelings for Khalil grew more complex. He was attentive to her needs, ensuring she had proper medical care for her pregnancy and creating a peaceful environment for her work. But more than that, he seemed to understand her in a way that few people ever had. He didn't judge her for her past mistakes or treat her like a charity case. Instead, he engaged with her as an equal, valuing her expertise and insights. The attraction was mutual and undeniable. Sarah caught him looking at her with an intensity that made her heart race, and their conversations often continued long into the night. When he finally kissed her in late January, it felt like the most natural thing in the world. "I didn't plan for this to happen," he said afterward, his forehead resting against hers. "Neither did I," Sarah replied, "but I'm not sorry." Their relationship transformed the dynamic of the house. Sarah felt more secure than she had in months, surrounded by beauty and cared for by a man who seemed to genuinely value her. For the first time since her world had collapsed, she began to imagine a future that didn't involve constant struggle and uncertainty. But even as happiness crept back into her life, questions lingered. Why had Khalil chosen her specifically? For this work? How had he known about her research expertise? And why did some of his questions about her mother's papers feel less like casual conversation and more like careful interrogation? One night in February, as Sarah worked late in the collection room, she noticed something that made her blood run cold. In a glass case containing medieval manuscripts, she spotted a small notation card in familiar handwriting. The elegant script belonged to her mother. She would recognize it anywhere. The card was tucked behind a 13th century illuminated manuscript, barely visible unless viewed from the exact angle where Sarah happened to be standing. Her mother's handwriting noted specific details about the manuscript's origin and a series of numbers that Sarah recognized as coordinates. With trembling hands, Sarah photographed the card with her phone, her mind racing. How could her mother's research notes be part of Khalil's collection? What connection existed between her mother's mysterious work and the pieces she was now cataloging? That night, Sarah lay awake staring at the ceiling, the pieces of a puzzle she hadn't known existed, slowly beginning to form a picture. Her mother's death, her own academic downfall, her chance encounter with Omar at the shelter, and now finding her mother's handwriting among Khalil's collection. None of it felt like coincidence anymore. As the baby kicked gently against her ribs, Sarah made a decision. She would continue her work, but she would also begin investigating the connections she was starting to see. If her mother had been involved in research that somehow connected to this collection, Sarah needed to understand what that meant. She had no way of knowing that Khalil was also lying awake, wrestling with feelings he hadn't expected to develop. What had begun as a carefully orchestrated plan was becoming complicated by genuine emotions, and he faced a choice that would determine not only Sarah's fate, but his own. The disappearance happened on a Tuesday morning in early March. Sarah woke to find the mansion eerily quiet, the usual sounds of staff activity conspicuously absent. When she went downstairs looking for Khalil, she found only empty rooms and a silence that made her skin crawl. The kitchen was spotless, but cold. The collection room was locked, and her keycard no longer worked. Even the groundskeepers were gone, leaving behind immaculate gardens and no explanation. It was as if everyone except Sarah had simply vanished into the Colorado morning. Panic set in slowly, then all at once. Her phone had no signal, it never had in the remote location, and the landlines had been disconnected. The cars were gone from the garage, and the electronic gates wouldn't respond to any of the codes she knew. She was 8 months pregnant, alone in a mansion in the mountains, with no way to contact the outside world. It took local search and rescue 6 hours to reach her after she managed to hike to a point where her phone caught a weak signal. The rescue team found her exhausted and frightened, sitting on a rock outcropping a mile from the house, tears streaming down her face. "Ma'am, are you injured?" asked the lead rescuer, a kind-faced man named Tom, who helped her into the emergency vehicle. "No, just abandoned," Sarah said, the word tasting bitter in her mouth. "The people I was staying with just disappeared." Later, at the hospital in Aspen, where they took her for evaluation, Sarah learned that the property was registered to a shell company that had been dissolved the previous week. According to public records, the house had been put up for sale, and all furnishings had been removed by a moving company. 3 days earlier, there was no record of Khalil al-Rashid owning or renting the property. "It's like he never existed," Detective Martinez told her as she sat in the hospital bed, monitors tracking her blood pressure and the baby's heartbeat. "We can't find any evidence that anyone by that name has been in Colorado recently." Sarah felt like she was drowning. The man she had fallen in love with, who had seemed to offer her a chance at redemption and security, had vanished as completely, as if he had never existed. Worse, she was left with nothing, no money, no resources, and no explanation. A nurse helped her contact social services, and within hours, Sarah found herself back in the shelter system, this time in Denver. The irony wasn't lost on her. She was exactly where she had started, except now she was days away from giving birth and emotionally shattered by betrayal. It was in the Denver shelter that she met Janet Rodriguez, an investigative journalist who had been following a story about international art trafficking. Janet approached Sarah after hearing about her unusual circumstances from one of the social workers. "Dr. Mitchell, I know this might sound strange, but I think you might be able to help me with something I've been working on," Janet said as they sat in the shelter's common area. "And I think I might be able to help you understand what happened to you." Janet spread a folder across the table, revealing photographs, documents, and newspaper clippings. Sarah's breath caught as she recognized some of the pieces from Khalil's collection in the photographs. "These items have been surfacing at auction houses and private sales across the country," Janet explained. "All of them have questionable provenance, and many are known to have been stolen during World War II. We've been tracking a network of dealers and collectors who specialize in moving these pieces through legitimate channels." "What does this have to do with me?" Janet pulled out a photograph that made Sarah's heart stop. It was her mother, Linda Mitchell, standing next to a painting Sarah recognized from her recent work. But her mother looked young in the photo, perhaps in her 30s, and she was standing next to a man Sarah didn't recognize. "Your mother was investigating this same network 20 years ago," Janet said gently. "She was working with the FBI's art crime team, trying to trace stolen artwork that was being laundered through American galleries and auction houses." Sarah stared at the photograph, her mind reeling. "That's impossible. My mother was a housewife. She painted as a hobby." On the surface, yes, but she was also one of the most knowledgeable art historians of her generation. She went underground. After receiving threats related to her investigation, the car accident that took her life, it was never definitively proven to be accidental. The room seemed to spin around Sarah. Everything she thought she knew about her life, her family, her circumstances was crumbling. "Are you saying she was eliminated? We can't prove it, but 3 other researchers working on similar cases have experienced convenient accidents over the past 2 decades. Your mother's work got too close to exposing a multi-million-dollar network. Janet opened another folder. What I'm about to show you might be difficult, but I think you need to see it. The first document was a surveillance photo of Khalil al-Rashid, but he was identified as David Qassem, a known associate of several individuals under investigation for art trafficking. The second was a record of his travel to Chicago, dated 2 days before he had approached Sarah at the shelter. He sought you out specifically, Janet explained. Your expertise in Nazi-looted artwork, combined with your mother's previous research, made you a valuable asset. The plan was to use your skills to authenticate and legitimize pieces in their inventory. But why destroy my career first? Why not just approach me professionally? Because they needed you desperate. A respected professor with options might ask too many questions, demand too much documentation, or involve authorities. A disgraced academic with nowhere else to turn would be grateful for any opportunity and less likely to probe too deeply. Sarah felt sick. The accusation from Bradley Hawthorne, the swift and brutal response from the university, the media attention, it had all been orchestrated. Her entire downfall had been engineered to make her vulnerable to Khalil's offer. The student who accused you, Janet continued, his family has financial connections to several galleries and auction houses that we've identified as part of this network. The timing wasn't coincidental. As the truth sank, in Sarah felt a complex mix of anger, betrayal, and oddly relief. She hadn't been destroyed by bad luck or poor judgment. She had been targeted by criminals who feared what she might discover. Her professional reputation had been assassinated to serve their purposes. There's more, Janet said. We believe your mother hid research materials before her accident. Notes, documentation, evidence that could help us prosecute this network. Do you have any idea where she might have put them? Sarah thought about the boxes of her mother's papers she had stored in Chicago, the ones she had mentioned to Khalil during their intimate conversations. The coded notes, the strange connections, the lists of names and places. It hadn't been amateur research. It had been a professional investigation. I have some of her papers, Sarah said slowly, but they're in storage in Chicago. I never understood what they meant. We need to get those papers, Janet said urgently. But first we need to make sure you're safe. If they went to all this trouble to get close to you, they're not going to just walk away. 2 days later, Sarah went into labor. As she held her daughter, a beautiful, healthy baby girl she named Hope, she felt a surge of determination that surprised her with its intensity. This child would not grow up in a world where criminals could destroy innocent lives with impunity. Janet had arranged for enhanced security at the hospital, and federal agents were now involved in the investigation. During Sarah's recovery, they retrieved her mother's papers from the Chicago storage facility. What they found was a treasure trove of evidence spanning 2 decades, detailed documentation of art trafficking networks, photographs of stolen pieces, and, most importantly, a complete record of financial transactions connecting galleries, auction houses, and private collectors. Your mother was brilliant, Agent Patricia Collins told Sarah as they reviewed the materials. She had built a case that could have brought down dozens of people, but she knew she was in danger, so she hid the evidence and went underground. Among the papers was a sealed envelope addressed to Sarah in her mother's handwriting. Inside was a letter that brought tears to her eyes. My dearest Sarah, if you are reading this, then I'm gone and you have somehow stumbled upon my work. I pray that day never comes, but if it does, you need to know the truth. The art world is not the pure academic pursuit we pretend it to be. It is tainted by greed, corruption, and the ghosts of history's greatest crimes. I have spent years documenting how stolen artwork continues to circulate through legitimate channels, enriching criminals while denying justice to victims' families. My research has made me enemies, and I fear they will eventually silence me. But I have faith that if something happens to me, you will carry on this work. Your brilliant mind and pure heart are exactly what this fight needs. The evidence I have gathered is hidden in places they will never think to look. Use it wisely, And trust no one completely until you are certain of their motives. The enemy is not always obvious, and they have resources we can barely imagine. I love you more than words can express. Make them pay for what they have stolen. Your Mother Linda. 2 months after Hope's birth, Sarah received an unexpected visitor at the safe house where she was staying under federal protection. It was Khalil, or David as she now knew him, but he looked different, older, more haggard, and there was something desperate in his eyes. "Sarah, I need you to know that I never meant for any of this to happen," he said, his hands shaking. As he spoke, "I was supposed to use you, get the information we needed and disappear, but I fell in love with you, really, truly in love." Sarah held Hope closer, studying the man who had deceived her so completely. "Is any of it real? Your name, your story, your feelings for me?" "My feelings are real. Everything else." He shook his head. "I've been part of this network my entire adult life. It's all I've ever known. But being with you, seeing your passion for truth and justice, it changed something in me. What do you want from me now? I want to help you destroy them, all of them. I have information about the entire operation, names, locations, financial records. I can give you everything you need to bring them down." Agent Collins, who had been listening from the next room, stepped forward. "And what do you want in return?" "Protection for my family, my real family, not the criminals who raised me. I have a sister and nieces who have nothing to do with this business. If I testify, they'll be targets." Sarah looked at this man who had been both her salvation and her downfall. "Why should I trust you?" "Because I'm the father of your child," he said quietly. The room fell silent. Sarah stared at him, confusion and shock warring on her face. "What are you talking about?" "Hope's father is Marcus Thompson." "No, Sarah. Think about the timing. We were together for months before I disappeared. The pregnancy you thought was from your relationship with Marcus. It happened after we were together." Sarah's mind raced, calculating dates and possibilities. The timeline did fit, but she had been so certain about Marcus being the father. "That's impossible. I was careful." "We were careful." "Not always," Khalil said gently. "Remember that night in January when we first made love? You were emotional. About your mother, and afterward?" Sarah's face went pale as she remembered. In the aftermath of their first intimate encounter, birth control had been the furthest thing from her mind. She had been so overwhelmed by finally feeling loved and secure that she hadn't considered the practical implications. "I had blood tests done," she whispered. "The father is definitely Marcus Thompson." "Then we need to do new tests," Agent Collins said. "If Mr. Kassem is telling the truth, it changes everything about this case." The paternity test results came back 3 days later. David Kassem, the man she had known as Khalil al-Rashid, was indeed Hope's father. Sarah felt like the ground had shifted beneath her feet once again. Her daughter was the child of a criminal, born from a relationship built on lies and manipulation. But as she looked at Hope's tiny face, she realized that none of the circumstances of her conception changed the love Sarah felt for her. This child was innocent of her father's crimes, and she deserved a chance at a clean life. Over the following months, Sarah worked closely with federal investigators to build a case against the art trafficking network. Her mother's research, combined with David's insider knowledge and her own expertise, provided enough evidence to secure indictments against 47 individuals across the United States and Europe. The trial was a media sensation. Sarah testified about her mother's work, her own experiences, and the systematic way the network had destroyed her career to make her vulnerable to recruitment. David's testimony was even more damaging, revealing the inner workings of an organization that had been operating for decades. When the verdicts were announced, Sarah felt a complex mix of emotions. Justice had been served, but at tremendous personal cost. Her academic career was in ruins, her family relationships were destroyed, and she was a single mother with an uncertain future. But as she walked out of the courthouse with hope in her arms, she was approached by Dr. Elizabeth Warren, the Dean of the Art History Department at the University of Colorado, Denver. "Dr. Mitchell, I've been following your case closely," Dr. Warren said. "Your work in exposing this network has been extraordinary. I'd like to offer you a position with our department, associate professor with tenure track, specializing in art crime and provenance research." Sarah stared at her in shock. "But my reputation..." "Your reputation is that of a brilliant scholar who sacrificed everything to expose corruption and seek justice. That's exactly the kind of integrity we want in our faculty." As Sarah considered the offer, she felt something she hadn't experienced in over a year: hope for the future. Not just for herself, but for her daughter, who would grow up knowing that her mother had fought for truth and won. David was sentenced to 15 years in prison, but with the possibility of parole in 7 years due to his cooperation. Before he was taken away, he asked to speak with Sarah one more time. "I know I can never make up for what I did to you," he said, his voice breaking, "but I want you to know that loving you was the most real thing I've ever experienced, and I want to be part of Hope's life if you'll let me when I get out." Sarah looked at him for a long moment. "I can't promise anything, but I won't keep her from knowing who her father is when she's old enough to understand." 6 months later, Sarah was settling into her new role at the university. Her first lecture was about the intersection of art, crime, and justice, a topic she understood better than anyone. As she looked out at the packed auditorium, she saw students who reminded her of herself at that age, passionate about art, eager to learn, and unaware of the complex moral challenges that awaited them. "Art is not created in a vacuum," she began. "Every piece has a story, and some of those stories are darker than we want to admit. But it is our responsibility as scholars and human beings to seek the truth, no matter how uncomfortable it might make us." After the lecture, a young woman approached her. "Professor Mitchell, I just wanted to say thank you. My great-grandfather was a Holocaust survivor, and his family lost everything. Reading about your work gives me hope that someday we might recover some of what was stolen from us." Sarah smiled, thinking of her mother and the legacy she had left behind. "Never give up hope," she said. "Justice may be slow, but it's worth fighting for." That evening, as she fed Hope and prepared for bed, Sarah reflected on the journey that had brought her to this point. She had lost everything: her career, her family, her trust in others, but she had also found something she didn't know she was looking for: a purpose larger than herself. Her phone buzzed with a text message from Janet Rodriguez, new lead on Nazi-looted artwork surfacing in Miami auction house. Interested in consulting on the investigation? Sarah looked at her daughter, sleeping peacefully in her arms, and smiled. Hope would grow up in a world where her mother fought for justice, where truth mattered more than comfort, and where the sins of the past could not hide forever in the Buo shadows. "Count me in," she texted back. The war against art crime was far from over, but Sarah Mitchell, survivor, mother, and seeker of truth, was ready for whatever came next. Film de Historia. Dear listeners, we hope Sarah and Hope's story has moved you as much as it moved us. This tale of resilience, betrayal, and ultimate triumph reminds us that even in our darkest moments, we have the power to fight back and reclaim our lives. Sarah's journey from despair to justice shows us that the truth, no matter how deeply buried, always finds a way to surface. If this story touched your heart, we've prepared a special playlist of equally captivating stories that explore the complexity of human nature and the power of determination. You can find it by clicking on the link to your left. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel and hit that like button if you enjoyed Sarah's incredible journey. Every day we bring you unique stories that celebrate the strength of the human spirit and the importance of never giving up hope. We'd love to hear your thoughts about Sarah's story in the comments below. Have you ever faced a situation where everything seemed lost, only to discover inner strength you didn't know you possessed? Share your experiences with our community of listeners who understand that life's greatest challenges often lead to our most meaningful victories. Thank you for joining us on this emotional journey, and we look forward to bringing you more inspiring stories that remind us all that justice, love, and hope can triumph over even the darkest circumstances.